My family thought I was broke at 72 until they saw who attended my birthday party. The first time I heard my son whisper the word broke, I was standing in my own kitchen holding a tray of biscuits. He did not know I was there. "Mom barely has anything left," he told his wife in a low voice. "We need to think ahead. Think ahead." As if I were already fading away, as if my life had become a problem to solve. I stood still behind the doorway and listened to the rest of the conversation without making a sound. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, sighed softly. "I feel bad for her," she said, "but she should probably sell the house eventually. It's too much for one person." Sell the house. They were talking about my home, the same house where I raised my son, where I sat beside my husband during his final winter, where every wall held a memory. I could have walked in and told them the truth right then. I could have explained that I was not broke at all, but something inside me stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe I wanted to see who my family believed I was when they thought I had nothing left to give. So I carried the tray into the living room, smiled, and pretended I had heard nothing. Over the next few months, the small changes began. Invitations arrived later than they used to. Decisions were made without asking me. My son offered to help manage my finances. Even though I had never asked for help, "You shouldn't worry about money at your age," he told me one afternoon. I looked at him and nodded. "You're kind to think of me." But inside, I was grieving something I could not yet name. It was not the money. It was the way people look at you when they think your usefulness is over. I had spent 40 years building a business with my husband, Harold. We started with one tiny storefront and turned it into a respected regional company. After Harold passed away, I sold my shares quietly and invested the proceeds. I never flaunted it. I drove the same old car, wore simple clothes, and lived in the same modest house. To me, that was normal. To my family, it apparently looked like decline. Then my 72nd birthday approached. Melissa suggested a small family dinner at my house. She said it gently, but I could hear the real meaning. Keep costs down. "That sounds lovely," I replied. What I did not tell them was that I had already planned something very different. I had decided to host my birthday party at the old lakeside hotel Harold and I used to visit every summer. I invited family, yes, but I also invited former employees, old friends, business partners, neighbors, and people whose lives had crossed mine over the decades. I wanted one evening that reflected the truth of my life, not the version my family had imagined. I wanted them to see who showed up for me when nothing was expected in return. And I wanted them to understand, gently but clearly, that wealth is not always visible. Before I continue, if you enjoy stories about family, life lessons, and unexpected moments of truth, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories like this one to you. Now, let me tell you what happened next. My name is Annie Whitmore, though most people call me Anna. I am 72 years old, widowed, and still living in the same 2-story brick house in Cedar Grove, Ohio. Harold and I bought it in 1976 when our son Daniel was 4 years old. Back then, the neighborhood smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke in the summer. Children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. We thought we would stay for a few years. We stayed for 50. Harold was the practical one, quiet, steady, the kind of man who fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken. I was more outgoing. I handled customers, community events, and eventually much of the business side of our company. We built Whitmore Supply together, a small construction and hardware business that slowly grew into a respected regional operation. Nothing flashy, just years of hard work, careful decisions, and trust earned one customer at a time. Daniel grew up around it all. He stocked shelves as a teenager, learned bookkeeping in college, and eventually chose a different career in software sales. Harold and I supported that choice completely. We never expected him to join the business. Build your own life, Harold used to tell him. Daniel did. He married Melissa, bought a modern house across town, and had 2 children, Emma and Lucas. I adored them from the moment they arrived. After Harold died 8 years ago, the house became very quiet. Grief is strange that way. The world keeps moving, but your own rooms feel frozen in time. I learned to live with the silence. I also made some practical decisions. I sold my remaining ownership in the company to Harold's longtime business partner, invested the proceeds conservatively, and met with a financial advisor every year. I had more than enough to live comfortably. But I did not change my lifestyle much. I still clipped coupons. I still repaired things instead of replacing them. I still cooked simple meals and wore Harold's old cardigan around the house on cold evenings. Some people call that frugal. To me, it felt respectful. We had worked hard for what we had. Daniel visited regularly at first. Sunday lunches, quick repairs around the house, grandchildren racing through the hallway. Melissa was polite and organized, though we were never especially close. She liked efficiency. I liked lingering conversations. Neither approach is wrong. We simply moved through the world differently. The shift happened gradually enough that I almost missed it. It started after a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. I mentioned that the furnace needed servicing, and Daniel immediately offered to pay for it. "You don't need to spend money on that," he said. "I've got it." I thanked him, though I did not need the help. Then came offers to cover groceries, replace my car, and simplify my bills. At first I assumed it was generosity, a son caring for his aging mother. But generosity has a certain warmth to it. This felt different. It felt managerial. One afternoon, Melissa arrived with a folder full of paperwork. We were thinking, she began carefully, "It might help if we organized your finances. Just so everything is easier later." Easier later. Another phrase that made me feel like a project instead of a person. I asked what made them think I needed help. Melissa hesitated. "You've seemed worried about expenses," she said, "and the house needs maintenance." I realized then that my ordinary habits, saving leftovers, postponing cosmetic repairs, talking about costs the way older people often do, had become evidence in a story they were writing about me. A story in which I was quietly running out of money. I could have corrected them immediately. I had the account statements, the investment reports, the retirement income summaries. Instead, I said, "I appreciate your concern. I'll let you know if I need help." After that, they stopped asking directly about money, but the assumption remained. Daniel began choosing cheaper restaurants when we ate together. Melissa suggested I skip buying gifts for the grandchildren to save. Once, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone, "We're trying to make sure Anna is okay financially." The strange part was that they were not being cruel. They genuinely believed they were helping. But pity can become its own kind of distance. The hardest moments were with the grandchildren. Emma, who was 13 and wonderfully observant, once asked Grandma, "Are you poor now?" Children speak truths adults soften. I smiled and told her, "No, sweetheart. I just don't spend money carelessly." She nodded, unconvinced. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table and looked around the house. The wallpaper Harold and I hung ourselves, the cabinet scratches from Daniel's toy trucks, the piano no one played anymore. I realized my family saw only the worn edges of my life, not the foundation underneath, and perhaps that was partly my fault. I had spent years avoiding conversations about money because I believed modesty was a virtue. I did not want anyone to treat me differently because of wealth. Instead, They treated me differently because they believed I had none. I want to pause here for a moment because what happened next is the part I have never told anyone fully, not Daniel, not Melissa, not even Martin. There was a secret I had been carrying for months, a decision I had made quietly, alone, at my kitchen table one rainy Tuesday evening. And that decision, that one quiet choice, would change everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Rising conflict by the spring before my birthday, the assumption had hardened into certainty. Daniel began talking openly about downsizing my life. "The stairs are tough on you," he said during one visit. "A condo would be easier." "I manage just fine," I replied. "For now," Melissa added gently, "for now," as if my independence had an expiration date. I noticed other things, too. They discussed my future in front of me instead of with me. They assumed I could not afford certain outings. They praised me for being brave about money troubles I did not have. One Sunday, Daniel arrived with a realtor's brochure tucked under his arm. "Just options," he said quickly when he saw my expression. "No pressure." I took the brochure, set it on the coffee table, and asked, "Do you think I can't keep this house?" He looked uncomfortable. "Mom, we know things are tight." There it was. The belief stated plainly. "What makes you think that?" I asked. "You're always worried about costs," he said. "You never travel anymore. You keep putting off repairs." I almost laughed from the absurdity of it. I had just returned from a week at a coastal inn with old friends, but I had not mentioned it because it seemed unimportant. The delayed repairs were cosmetic choices, not financial necessities. What Daniel did not know, what none of them knew, was that while they were busy planning my future, I had already begun planning something of my own, something they never saw coming. "I appreciate your concern," I said quietly. After they left, I cried for the first time in months, not because they thought I was poor, because they no longer seemed to see me clearly. A few weeks later, my former business partner, Martin Reyes, invited me to lunch. Martin had known Harold since before Daniel was born. He listened carefully as I described the situation. "Why haven't you told them the truth?" he asked. I stirred my soup and considered the question. "Because I wanted them to care about me, not my bank account," I said. "And now I'm not sure they know the difference." Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Anna, people often fill silence with assumptions. You've been silent." He was right, of course. But another truth sat beneath it. I was hurt. I did not want to hand over proof of my worth like a receipt. But I had realized something else too, something Martin did not yet know. I was done being silent. I was done being managed and pitied and spoken about like a problem to be solved. I had a plan, and I intended to see it through. Around that time, Emma started visiting me alone on Saturdays. We baked cookies, watched old movies, and talked about school. One afternoon she asked, "Grandma, why don't you tell Dad you're okay?" I looked at her in surprise. "What makes you think I'm okay?" She shrugged. "You don't act scared. Poor people at school act scared. Children notice everything." I smiled softly. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Then why not tell him? Sometimes adults misunderstand each other," I said, "and sometimes pride gets in the way." She thought about that seriously, then said, "That sounds exhausting." It was. But exhaustion, I have learned, can be the beginning of action. The final straw came in early June, a month before my birthday. Daniel called and asked if I could skip buying gifts for Lucas's soccer tournament fundraiser. "You don't need to spend money on extras," he said. "Your presence is enough." My presence is enough. A kind sentence on the surface, a heartbreaking one underneath. After we hung up, I opened the drawer where I kept Harold's old letters. He used to leave notes for me before business trips, small reminders to pay the electric bill, feed the neighbor's cat, or simply don't forget to laugh. One note caught my eye. Anna, never let people decide your value by what they think you own. You know who you are. I sat there for a long time holding that paper. Then I made a decision, the one I had been slowly building toward for months. I called the Lakeside Grand Hotel and booked the ballroom for my birthday weekend. The manager recognized my name immediately. Harold and I had celebrated anniversaries there for decades. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly, "it would be our pleasure." I hired a small jazz trio. I ordered Harold's favorite chocolate cake with raspberry filling. I arranged for old photographs to be displayed around the room, not just family pictures, but images from the business, community events, and charity projects we had supported over the years. Most importantly, I began inviting people, former employees, suppliers, church friends, neighbors, the librarian who helped me start the community reading program, a retired contractor whose daughter's college tuition Harold and I had quietly paid after an accident left him unable to work for a season. I did not invite them to impress anyone. I invited them because they had been part of my life. When Daniel called to discuss the small family dinner, I told him I had already made plans. "A few friends are coming," I said. "At your house?" he asked. "At the lakeside." There was a pause. "Mom, that place is expensive." "I know," I said calmly. "It's my birthday." Another pause. "Are you sure that's a good idea financially?" I looked out the window at the hydrangeas Harold planted years ago. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." The day of the party arrived warm and bright, with sunlight glittering across the lake behind the hotel. I arrived early, wearing a deep blue dress Harold once said matched my eyes. The ballroom looked beautiful in the soft afternoon light. White tablecloths, small floral arrangements, photographs displayed along one wall like a timeline of a life. I walked slowly past the pictures before guests arrived. Harold laughing beside a delivery truck in 1982. Daniel as a little boy holding a hammer twice the size of his hand. Employees gathered for holiday dinners, community fundraisers, family vacations, a life stitched together moment by moment. The first guests arrived at 5 o'clock. Mrs. Patel from church hugged me tightly. Martin brought his wife and a bottle of wine from Harold's favorite vineyard. Former employees greeted me with stories and laughter. The room filled steadily. Then Daniel and Melissa walked in with the children. I saw Daniel pause near the entrance, taking in the ballroom, the musicians, the crowd already gathering around me. "Mom," he said slowly, "I thought this was just a small dinner." "It grew a little," I replied with a smile. Melissa looked around at the hotel staff, moving efficiently through the room. "This must have cost a fortune." I met her eyes gently. "It cost what I chose to spend." Before she could respond, an older man approached us. Daniel recognized him after a moment. "Mr. Benson?" "Danny Whitmore." The man boomed, shaking his hand. "Your mother saved my business in '94 when the bank wouldn't extend our credit line. I've wanted to thank her properly for years." Daniel glanced at me, surprised. Another guest joined us, Linda Carver, who had worked for Whitmore Supply for 30 years. "Your parents changed my life," she told Daniel. "When my husband got sick, they kept me on payroll and covered my insurance for 6 months. Never asked for publicity. Never mentioned it again." Melissa's expression softened into confusion. The evening continued, and with each conversation, another piece of the hidden story emerged. A contractor whose daughter became a nurse because Harold and I helped with tuition. A local nonprofit director who described donations made anonymously for years. Former employees who spoke about loyalty, fairness, and opportunities they had received through the company. Daniel moved through the room quietly, listening more than talking. I could see memories rearranging themselves behind his eyes. During dinner, the jazz trio played softly while guests shared stories at their tables. Emma sat beside me, glowing with excitement. "Grandma, everyone knows you," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "Not everyone, sweetheart, just people who walked part of the road with me." After dessert, Martin tapped his glass for attention. "Anna," he said, standing near the photographs, "I know you didn't plan speeches, but some of us would regret leaving without saying this publicly." The room grew still. I worked with Harold and Anna for 40 years. People often measure success by what they can see: big houses, expensive cars, headlines, but the real measure is how many people show up when there's nothing to gain. He gestured around the ballroom. "Look around. These people came because your kindness mattered to them, because your integrity lasted, because you and Harold built more than a business. You built trust." I felt tears sting my eyes. Martin smiled gently. "Happy birthday, Anna." Applause filled the room, warm and unforced. When it faded, Daniel stood slowly from his seat. "Mom," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I think I owe you an apology." The room quieted again. He looked at me directly. "I thought you were struggling financially. Melissa and I talked about helping, about downsizing the house, about managing things for you." He swallowed hard. "I realize now that I wasn't really seeing you. I was seeing my own assumptions." Melissa reached for his hand, eyes shining with tears. "We were wrong," she said softly. I took a breath before answering. "You were concerned," I said. That part came from love. But concern became certainty, and certainty became distance. Daniel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "I never wanted you to feel like a burden," he said finally. "I know," I replied, "and I never wanted my life reduced to a balance sheet." Emma suddenly stood up beside me. "Grandma isn't poor," she announced with 13-year-old certainty. "She's just careful." Laughter rippled through the room, easing the tension. I pulled her into a hug. "That's a pretty good summary." The rest of the evening felt different, lighter, more honest. Daniel asked questions about the business and the people in the room. Melissa listened to stories she had never heard. Lucas discovered the dessert table for the 3rd time and declared the chocolate cake historic. As the party wound down, guests hugged me goodbye one by one. Many pressed my hands and thanked me for something I barely remembered doing. That is the strange thing about kindness. The giver often forgets, but the receiver may carry it for decades. When the ballroom had mostly emptied, Daniel remained behind with me near the photographs. He picked up one picture of Harold teaching him to use a measuring tape. "I've been so busy," he said quietly. "Work, kids, mortgages, schedules. I think I started treating life like a series of problems to manage." I touched the edge of the frame. "We all do that sometimes." He looked at me then, really looked at me, in a way he had not for a long while. "I forgot who you were before you were just my mom," he said. The sentence hurt, but it also felt honest. "I'm still your mother," I replied softly. "But I was a person before that, too. In the weeks after the party, our family did not transform overnight into a perfect storybook ending. Real relationships rarely work that way, but something important had shifted." Daniel stopped speaking to me in that careful managerial tone. He began asking questions instead of making assumptions. "How are you handling the house?" became, "Do you want help with the house? You shouldn't spend money on that" became "What are you planning to do?" The difference sounds small. It was not. Melissa changed too, though more quietly. One afternoon she came by with coffee and sat at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. We talked about Emma's school projects, Lucas's endless appetite, and eventually the party. "I'm embarrassed," she admitted. "I thought I was being practical, but I realized I was talking about your life like it belonged to us." I appreciated her honesty. "You were trying to help," I said. "But help works best when it starts with listening." She nodded slowly. Over time, our conversations became easier, not magically intimate, but more human, less filtered through assumptions. The grandchildren changed in the most natural way of all. They simply saw me differently. Emma started asking about the business and my younger years. She wanted stories about Harold, about starting with almost nothing, about mistakes and risks and long days at the store. "You and Grandpa built all that?" she asked one evening, eyes wide. "We built it together," I said. One ordinary day at a time. Lucas cared less about business history and more about whether I could still beat him at cards. I usually could. As for the house, I decided to keep it, not out of stubbornness, but because I still loved living there. I did make some changes: handrails on the stairs, a bathroom update, better lighting in the hallway. I paid for everything myself. Daniel noticed, of course. "You didn't have to handle that alone," he said when he saw the renovations. "I know," I replied, "but I wanted to." He smiled sheepishly. "I'm still adjusting. So am I." One evening in early autumn, he and Melissa invited me to dinner. After the meal, Daniel brought out a small photo album. Inside were pictures from the birthday party, candid moments someone had captured throughout the evening. Me laughing with old friends, Emma dancing near the band, Daniel standing quietly in front of the photo wall. On the last page, he had written a note: "Mom, thank you for reminding me that a person's value is not measured by what I assume they have, but by the life they have lived and the love they have given." I'm sorry I forgot that. I closed the album and looked at my son. The little boy with the oversized hammer was still there, somewhere inside the tired, middle-aged man. "Thank you," I said. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing not to let hurt become the final chapter. I still think about the months before the party and how lonely they felt. Being misunderstood by strangers is unpleasant. Being misunderstood by family reaches deeper. But I also understand now that silence helped create the misunderstanding. I had hidden parts of my life for so long that even the people closest to me filled in the blanks themselves. Modesty has value. So does openness. A few months later, Emma interviewed me for a school project about community impact. She sat at my dining table with a notebook and asked serious questions in a serious voice. "What do you think is the most important thing you accomplished?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Not the business," I said finally. "Businesses matter, but they can be sold. I think the most important thing was trying to leave people a little steadier than I found them." She wrote that down exactly. Then she asked, "What about money? Is being rich important?" I smiled. "Money is useful," I said. "It can buy comfort, freedom, and opportunities. But it cannot buy the thing that filled that ballroom on my birthday." "What thing?" "Relationships that last." She nodded as if filing away a secret for later. Sometimes, late in the evening, I still sit in Harold's old chair and think about how quickly people can mistake simplicity for scarcity. Our culture often treats visible luxury as proof of success and quiet living as evidence of failure. But some of the wealthiest people I have known wore ordinary clothes, drove aging cars, and spent their energy on people instead of appearances. Harold used to say, if your self-worth depends on impressing strangers, you'll spend your whole life performing. I did not fully understand that when I was younger. I do now. My 72nd birthday did not prove that I was wealthy. It proved something more important. It showed my family and reminded me that a life cannot be measured only by appearances, assumptions, or account balances. The real evidence of a person's worth is often found in the people who show up, the stories they tell, and the kindness that outlives the moment it was given. Daniel and I still disagree sometimes. Melissa and I are still learning each other. The grandchildren are growing faster than I can keep up with. Life remains imperfect and ordinary. But now, when we gather around my table, there is less pity and more presence, less managing and more listening. And that is enough for me. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is a simple one. Never assume you know the value of someone's life by looking at the surface. The quiet woman in the old cardigan may have built businesses, carried grief, changed lives, and loved deeply long before you arrived. We are all larger than the stories others tell about us. I still keep Harold's note in my kitchen drawer. Never let people decide your value by what they think you own. You know who you are. On difficult days, I read it again. And I remember. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been misunderstood by the people closest to you? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Until next time, thank you for being here.